We have some really special guests, and it was a great honor to meet a few of the folks that have traveled down from Fayette County, the members of the leadership Fayette County, and then a great honor to meet some of those who are still active now or just got a wonderful story that maybe you'll hear a little bit about later about a gentleman whose dad was supporting and ended up in the back of the truck and having to keep quiet as he came down and help deliver some resources to keep this going. This is a real story of courage, of tenacity, of people learning to take pride and standing up for themselves. That was very, very important. And so welcome to all of you. Also to Mike Cody and Judge Bernice Donaldson, who were here this evening and made their way, who also have contributed so much. We have so many pioneers here in the room. I guess when we started going at all of them in the way they do, we'd have a long evening. One of the pioneers, one of the first African-American faculty members, David Acey, here at the University of Memphis. I want to say a special congratulations to our students from the SGA and the NAACP. Congratulations on the continued engagement on this very important thing of taking the struggles of those of your parents and your grandparents and honoring them by continuing it. To all the women here, of course, we know that African Americans, but it was your great-grandmothers and your great-grandmothers that struggled for you to have the vote. And for those of us that came in with various ethnic groups along the way, for all of us, there were struggles of people that did that. So taking the vote as something that is a right, and then increasingly remind people that with that right comes the obligation that you use it or you lose it, and that taking that seriously and honoring the struggles of those and the sacrifices of those that came before is a wonderful thing. So congratulations for taking that seriously. And again, of course, we have our thanks to our musician here and all the staff members who helped prepare this and brought in our food and did all those things. And above all, to the staff of the Hooks Institute, Rory and Nate and all the others who, in such a small group, turn out so much important work under the leadership of Daphne McFerrin, especially, from whom you'll hear later. Also to John Evans is here tonight, and with the library and providing a great place for this and the library faculty. So this is a great partnership like anything good that happens. So I'll wrap it up with that. Welcome, thanks, congratulations, and let's remember what's gone on before and continue the work of the Hooks Institute, remembering a legacy and using that to improve how things are today and taking forward progress into tomorrow in social justice. That's a great mission, and this is a great example of how they fulfill that mission. So I'll sit down. Thank you.
With this project, we really think that this is amazing, and we are so lucky to be here today and feel so honored to be in front of you all today.
So we were approached by Amy this summer about some of the great work that she was doing in a possible partnership. We said absolutely, as SGA is responsible for all civic and voter engagement from the area of our students on campus. We were already planning some extensive programming around voter education and awareness. We are actually participating in a statewide competition between colleges and universities across the state, sponsored by Secretary of State Trey Harkin, who is a University of Memphis alum. So we are participating in that, and I am going to take some time to toot our own horn. I think the University of Memphis and our campus and community partners have put forth one of the most extensive programs for voter registration over the course of the month. So we partner with more than 10 campus and community organizations to put on programs all over the course of September, which is National Voter Registration Month. Unfortunately, we do not have any calendars here with us, but you can interact with SGA on our social media platforms on Facebook, and then also at SGA_U of M on Twitter and Instagram to find out our programs that we started in the beginning of September and that will run all the way to the October 2nd gubernatorial debate here at the University of Memphis.
So as you all know, that Memphis has, or Tennessee in general, has one of the lowest voter turnouts. So our goal is to make sure that our students here at the University of Memphis are taking voting seriously. We believe, as a unit, SGA believes that it's important for us to get out and vote so our voice can be heard and we can be represented in the masses. And Antonio?
Yeah, so also I think obviously we think voting is important because we wouldn't be here without it. And so we know what it's like to get voters engaged in SGA elections. And so Keviana and I think it's really important to get student voters engaged in local, state, and national elections. So it's something that we hold very near and dear to our hearts as a Student Government Association as representatives of the students.
So again, thank you for having us, and we look forward to what the rest of this night holds.
My name is Amy Ruggeber, and I have the distinct privilege of being the curator of this event. Not this event, this exhibit. There's a lot of curators at this event that are far beyond me. It is my philosophy as an artist that everyone has a story to tell and everyone has a story to hear. And working on this exhibit has really hammered that home for me. It's been more than a job. It has been an education and a distinct privilege. I use that word a lot, but I feel it deeply. Being entrusted by Daphne with a story that is so important, but also so personally precious, has been such a gift. As has working alongside the amazing team at the Hooks Institute. They've taken me in, and I have been so grateful for that. They do such extraordinary work, and it's incredible to see you all every day and what you put into the things that you put out into this world to make a difference. From the very first day that we began planning this exhibit, I knew we needed a tent. It was very important. I was adamant. There was a lot of discussion about it. But in my mind, it was a symbol and a siren call. It was the thing that was going to hook people and make them look at these panels and this information. It was the thing that was going to draw everybody's attention. So I do want to really thank the library staff for not making me not put a tent in the middle of their rotunda, because there was a lot of conversation about that, and they have been wonderfully gracious. But for me, this tent represents both the tents of Tent City and the privacy of a voting booth, because this is truly a dual exhibit. The exterior of this exhibit is designed to teach current day voter registration and teach our new voters how to prepare themselves, not just to register, but to get to the polls, how to prepare themselves to vote. So how to do absentee voting, because so many of our students on campus have to know about that information, and they have to plan in advance for that. And so the outside of this exhibit is all modern day information. But when you go inside the tent, you find the history, you find the background, you find what's important, and the reason that we're all able to do these things that are on the outside is because wonderful people stood up and risked everything to give us that opportunity. So everyone has a story to hear, and I needed to hear this one. And so does every young person who walks through those doors. They need to know the value of their vote and the costs associated with it. As I worked on this exhibit, I would often look at my son Nate, who is 4 years old, and contemplate what it must have been like for those families in Fayette County, those parents, to pack up their families to go and live in a tent for an undetermined amount of time. There was no endpoint in sight. And they did this simply for the opportunity to exercise a right that was already constitutionally theirs. They left land that they had farmed, sometimes for generations, and land that they had called their home. They left their roots. They risked their livelihood and their lives. Activists who supported them, they also risked violence and risked their lives. Less than 250 miles away, 3 men were murdered for doing exactly what these folks were doing. And when I sat and I thought about that context and what that must have felt like, it was overwhelming, that concern, that fear. And yet, they persisted. So it has made me consider, in very real terms, what I would be willing to give up for my trip to the polls in the next few weeks. So as you walk up to the polls, I challenge you to consider the same thing. What would you be willing to give up? So everyone should have a voting story. And this exhibit and this experience will forever be a part of mine now too. And I hope it inspires great voting stories for you. Thank you.
I'm just going to give give you a little background on the movement. First of all, I'm the daughter of John and Viola McFerrin. They're the leaders, among the leaders of the Fayette County, Tennessee Civil Rights Movement. They're considered the primary leaders. That movement started in 1959 due to a shootout in 1940, and you'll read this on the panels, when a black man named Burton Dotson was in a shootout with a mob that was deputized to arrest him. Now, the black community believed in 1940 that the mob went out to kill Dotson. But Dotson and his sons were known throughout the black community as being, he didn't, quote, mess with them. In the shootout, a white deputy was killed. Based on the location of the white deputy, the African-American community concluded that the white deputy was killed by friendly fire. Dotson escaped that night and was found almost 18 years later in St. Louis and extradited back to Fayette County to stand trial. Now, what's not in the written text, and I've asked my parents about this, is what led to the shootout in 1940. And my mom and dad said, well, it was over a woman. And so there was a white man who was allegedly dating a black woman, and Dotson was dating the black woman too. And so he told him to stop seeing the woman, and allegedly the shootout occurred. And I said to them, not again, not another story, where something starts over a relationship. I mean, back to Genesis. So the good thing is, I think God has a sense of humor, because he starts it off on the most not necessarily clean facts to lead to systemic change. So in 1959, and you all know, most of you know this story, my dad, this is in the Commercial Appeal, went out and started, along with Hartman Jamison and other activists, to get people to register to vote. I do think he underestimated the degree of retaliation he would experience. I'm trying to tell you facts that are not in the exhibit. After people started to get evicted, he and my mother stayed out in the community to keep the spirits up of the people who had been evicted for 2 years. They did not work for 2 years. They lived off their savings for 2 years. Because in one of the exhibits, you see Mary Williams holding a baby, and their fear was living in the tents, the baby would freeze during the night. So my father was looking on in that photograph, relieved that the baby didn't freeze during the night. So when I think about their sacrifices, I often think how many of us could live 2 years without any income to keep a cause going. I don't think most people, because they don't talk about it, realize the personal sacrifices and financial sacrifices my parents made. They did not make it alone. I can't say that the community, the African-American community, was monolithic in support of the movement, but I grew up, I was not born during Tent City, but several years after that, I would attend all of the meetings, the mass meetings that they had. And one of the things that became obvious is that before any demonstration marches, they had to have 100% consensus from at least 100 of the people in the room about the march. And as a child, I mean, that often frustrated me because I wanted those meetings to end. But I realized, in retrospect, they wanted 100% agreement because if anyone was killed or injured, that they would take collective responsibility for that person's either injury or death. So some of the materials about the movement are in this booklet. It was the first case filed under the 1957 Civil Rights Act by the United States Department of Justice to protect the voting rights of African Americans in the nation. President Kennedy had been in office approximately 20 days when at a press conference, he was blindsided by a reporter asking, what are you going to do about the people in Tent City? And President Kennedy responded that it was the responsibility of the United States and the Department of Justice to protect the rights, the voting rights of African Americans. The Justice Department was frequently on the ground in Fayette County, including John Doerr, who my parents had great respect for. In 1965, my brother, who was 7 years old, became the lead plaintiff in the lawsuit, John McFerrin Jr. versus Fayette County Board of Education. The federal district court here in Memphis issued the most major, the case is still open, ironically, and it issued a decision in 2012 ordering further relief in that decision to remedy discrimination in schooling in Fayette County, and the case remained open to this day. So my brother, who was 7 years old, was frequently the target of harassment by his teachers because he was the son of a movement activist. That harassment was intense, and I don't think that people realize the sacrifices he made. So in any event, when doing the article for the Commercial Appeal this week, David Waters asked me if I had a photo of my parents leading a demonstration march. And this is the photo at the front that we have been using to advertise this event. That photo was licensed by the Hooks Institute from Art Shea. And I realized I don't have a lot of photos, the family doesn't have a lot of photos of my dad leading demonstration marches, because it was a tactic that he not lead marches because they were afraid that he would be killed. So movement activists, and primarily the men at that point, they'd get a quarter mile up the road from his business with the demonstration march, and then the men would take over. And James Jameson is nodding as I talk because that was a strategy. So years later, I recognized I have no photos of my father leading a demonstration march. Now, there was an exception to this in 1969 when my father and other activists, and I refer to my father collectively here because he didn't do it alone. He had the support of many. But in any event, there were some 3 black women who were beaten by 2 white men. And these white men owned a business in Somerville. And the black community were outraged that these women were beaten. And they held a boycott of the businesses in Fayette County, and it was called the Hobson Boycott. There were demonstration marches, as well as blacks not buying goods and services from whites. So during that particular march, my father got separated from the march, and he was confronted by a group of men hired to beat him, and they did. And I remember that vividly because after the beating, my uncle, and his daughter is here today, drove him to our house and told us to go inside. My father was in the truck, and he clearly was very injured. And they said, go into the house, this has happened, we don't want you all outside playing. So the memories of this movement are very vivid to me. And I give credit to Odell Horton, the former advisory board chair of the Hooks Institute, of explaining my role. Odell frequently tells me what I should do, even though he's no longer on the advisory board. So Odell said to me, he said, you know, you are a bridge. He says, you were too young to be an activist in the movement, but yet you have strong memories of the movement, and you have kept records and tried to archive the movement. And he said, it's your role to be that bridge between the past and the present and explain why issues of voting and equity are still relevant today as they were in the 1960s. Finally, my parents did not do it alone. They received a lot of assistance from all over the country, from organizations including the AFL-CIO. I did not know that my father knew Jimmy Hoffa. So Jimmy Hoffa came down with the AFL-CIO because they saw the evictions of tenant farmers as a labor issue. So I will never get to all of the stories because they lived it, and they don't tell the story chronologically. You can sit and look at a book and my dad go, oh, Jimmy Hoffa. I'm like, Jimmy Hoffa? And so I know one thing, if Jimmy Hoffa's in Fayette County, they'll never find him. So in any event, I also want to make clear that these movements take place, and especially the movement in Fayette County took place, with some sympathetic and sound-minded whites intervening. And in a twist of fate and sort of as a parody, I don't know how to describe it, the movement and my father and mother were aided in their efforts. So first of all, the first example I gave you is kind of ironic. A member of the Ku Klux Klan, they had a drawing of the straws to see who would kill John McPherson. And the person who drew the shortest straw said he could not go through with the execution. As a result of that, the Klan turned on him and beat him to a pulp. And so he then, out of anger, came to my father and mother and told them that a hit was on his life, out of anger with the Klan. They notified the FBI, it didn't take place. So I would think my mother would say that's godly intervention, so thank God for that meeting. Also, the Cornell students from many colleges, Cornell, Oberlin College, University of Chicago, brought students down who provided technical assistance and brought financial aid. There are other whites who lost everything for helping my parents and other activists in Fayette County. They could not, my father opened a store to try to sell goods to blacks who refused service by whites. A white person who owned a refinery came in the middle of the night and told my dad that he could help him get gas for his gas pumps, but he did not want anyone to know about it. He did provide that gas. Whites found out about it and from Fayette County, and they literally drove him out of business. When I interviewed my mother in 1995, she would not reveal the name of the person, or he had a nervous breakdown. But she still, even with me, and I agreed that I would not release names that she provided to me, was not comfortable in disclosing the name of this person who helped them. When my parents outgrew the first store and opened the second store and needed a loan to do the construction, they were refused a loan from the SBA here in Memphis, they believe in part because of the intervention of Fayette County whites. They received a loan from a wealthy white person in Louisiana who agreed that they did not have to pay them back if they did not receive a loan for it. They did receive the loan and they paid him back. In 1997, I went to the National Archives in Washington to see what they had on the Fayette County movement. To my great surprise and amazement, there were boxes and boxes of materials. And many of the boxes contained the FBI, we call them 302s. I was in the Department of Justice, and I am familiar with 302s. 302s are often destroyed after the case is closed because you don't want the person who provides confidential information name to become known because they may be put in danger. Well, I walked in, there were boxes of 302s. I contacted a librarian and I went, oh my God, I have found, a wealth of gold because I now know who the FBI interviewed. And so I said, but I can't read all of this stuff. It will take me months. And the librarian said, not here, it was another university. He said, don't read a thing. Close the boxes up, get them down to the copying room, and here's my credit card. Wow. He says, get them shipped to me, I will make you a copy, and I will ship the FBI 302 memorandums to you. Wow. So this was a great contribution to the collection. So what is the collection? What you see here tonight is the beginning of a traveling exhibition. It is from the collection created initially by me pursuant to a grant that I received from National Endowment for the Humanities. After I graduated from law school, collecting anything on Fayette County was the last thing I wanted to do. But my mother said to me, she said, Daphne, she said, if you don't get this stuff together and don't collect it, this history will be lost. My response to her is, I've just gotten out of law school and I'm ready to party. So to satisfy her, I applied because I didn't think I would get it, a grant from National Endowment for the Humanities. I don't have, at the time, the traditional pedigree of an academic scholar. I didn't have the publications, blah, blah, blah. And I said, okay, I'll do it, because I know I'm not going to get it. So I applied for the grant, and lo and behold, I opened the mailbox, and the envelope was thick. So I said, well, National Endowment, the trick is on me. So they allowed me 3 months to collect primary source materials on the movement, and I literally drove for 3 months, visiting various activists and collecting it. So this is what I would say. My parents would be very proud of the SGA because they would say to you, you're doing what you're supposed to do. They would ask you to understand the history, but in the words of Coretta Scott King, they would say struggle is a never-ending process. Freedom is never really won. You earn it and win it in every generation. This is your generation to make sure that America, for white people, poor people, marginalized people, remains a country that is inclusive. And I hope that you all, I know you're going to be leaders of the future, that you all will inspire your classmates to engage in the voter registration process.
I am the son of Hartman Jameson and Minnie Jameson, who were very involved in the civil rights movement, and also close friends to John McFerrin and his family. And I want to thank them for at least allowing me the right to grow up, to have the right to vote. As I grew, I didn't realize that being that they didn't have the right to vote, they didn't have the right to they didn't have the right to make decisions, make decisions and what took place in their daily life, daily living. So anyway, as time went on, there was a black man being tried for murder of a white man. And my dad, Mr. John McFerrin, Mr. Shepard Toes, were interested in knowing the outcome of this trial because the black man was being defended by a black attorney. In doing so, this is what, being that they wanted to be involved, they wanted to help the black lawyer out by being a part of the jury. and you had to be a registered voter to be part of the jury. So if there were no blacks in the county that were registered to vote. So this is probably what started the civil rights movement. Well, actually the voter registration movement. And voter registration movement, after the voter registration movement, people had to be evicted from the farms, you know, because the living conditions on the farms were very poor anyway. They was living in dwellings that if it rained, it probably rained in the house. There was probably no electricity provided in these homes. There probably no plumbing, no running water. But when the voter registration drive grew, these people were evicted from even those living conditions. So in those living conditions, there was a black landowner, Mr. Shepard Toes, who was also interested in being one of the jurors, and he had land there. And through the efforts of Mr. John McFerrin, he provided tents. They were Army surplus tents, and they were established on Mr. Shepard Toes' place in order to provide temporary housing for the people that were displaced because they wanted to register to vote. And after the voter registration drive, a number of people were, the people that living on the white landowners' farms were evicted. So being they were evicted, there was no place to go. Since they had no place to go, this was the start of Tent City. Tent City was established to provide temporary housing for these individuals. But I guess y'all can imagine the living conditions in Tent City. In the tent city, there was no flooring in the tent, so people was wading around in mud, probably sleeping on the ground. Probably the temperature was probably unbearable during the summer months because it was so humid, so hot in there, and during the winter months it was probably cold. And there were probably no real means of preparing food for the families. So, from my understanding, in some cases, more than 2 years, these people were, they were displaced. They were living in and out of these tents. So, I'm proud to see this exhibit here, and I thank them to the University of Memphis and the Benjamin Hooks Institute for providing this exhibit so our future generation can see the struggles that our kids, that our parents and grandparents had to go through to sustain the right to vote, and also it also provide them the right to register to vote so they can have opportunity to make decisions in their lives. So